All right, hello everybody and welcome to another neurodivergent learning session. This is officially the sixth section. We didn't have a session last month because I want to, I guess, do sort of a since I started a partnership with the Active Inference Institute, which is the nonprofit organization I'm interning at since I guess the beginning of the summer. Uh, so I wanted to have a little time for promotion on their server, and so for anybody who's wondering why there wasn't a session for a whole month, that's sort of the reason. I didn't want to do any last minute promotion last month, so here we are. And like I do with every session so far, I even though for those who want like the best elaboration on what is the goal and what's the overall point of these sessions and the motivation, even though and I think it's neurodivergent learning session too. I do have a recording of the very first session, but because there was a lot of interruptions and on it wasn't a clean recording, so I didn't upload it.
Hello?
But hello.
Here, give me a minute.
Oh, okay. So anyway,
Sorry.
yeah. So okay. So first, before getting into I guess maybe 10, 15 minutes of material I want to present, which is going to be partly what I presented last session, which is do it yourself experimentation, which is really cool. Basically, I have this jar of magnets, and I have magnets on each side of the jar, and I have iron filings in the jar, right? And the iron filings they are attracted to the magnets, and when the iron filings are like basically gravitated towards the magnets, they spike out in this really interesting way. So I'm going to show that again, and my primary motivation for showing that again is because the recording of last session was really choppy, and a couple videos I recorded within the past, I want to say a month and a half, were quite choppy, and I managed to finally figure out to get clean recordings. So I'm really happy about that. But anyway, so okay, what's the point of these sessions? So as somebody who struggles with autism, I struggled a lot with public and higher education. In public and higher education environment, especially the classroom environment, it wasn't very well motivated for me, and in terms of how the material was presented, it didn't feel intuitive for me to understand what I was trying to engage with, and it was quite frustrating, as anybody would imagine that struggles with schooling. And over the years, I managed to find ways that help me interact and engage with the world around me. And as somebody who wants to provide outreach to those who struggle to learn in their own way, and they want to figure out a way to adapt and cope with how they engage with the world around them, I figured I'd provide these sessions as ways of going over strategies to engage with content that is associated with whether or not you're trying to go to school and complete a degree, or maybe you're in a work oriented environment. Maybe you work at a desk, or you need a way to better, more intuitively engage with your day to day, or some aspects of your day to day that will 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 really um, make a difference. And I thought, since a lot of what I've talked about in the previous videos, a lot of the ways that I engage with information that work for me, I figured, you know what? I don't see a lot of people talking about content like this, and it's such a shame that a lot of people uh, feel disenfranchised in the face of standardized learning environments, be it public education, higher education. A lot of people, they don't feel like they have much of a voice, and a number of people, even with autism, mostly struggle with communication difficulties. I guess not so much from my point of view, not so much with learning, but there's still a portion of people out there on the spectrum, and not just people with autism, but people with attention deficit hyperactive disorder and other conditions that that cause learning impediments. I felt that there needs to be more content out there to provide an outreach or a means for people rather to not just, I don't want to just say cope, but to adapt to the world around them and deal with expectations and try to surpass and the obstacles that make it difficult uh, to engage more intuitively, like our fellow neurotypicals, if you will. Um, so that's really the motivation behind these sessions, and most importantly, to have a dialogue about what learning means, not just to me, but to all of us that are willing to jump on these sessions and talk about it. Whether or not they're like what makes learning difficult, what has helped with learning and engaging with information. I think that provides very valuable insight um, to even people who don't struggle so much with learning the way people who are neurodivergent struggle with learning. Now, I think that's pretty decent. I guess introduction to the motivation behind these sessions. I tend to just kind of give these motivated short introductions, even though I kind of go over them in the previous sessions. But for anyone who hasn't seen the second session, which is the first one of this video series in the playlist that I put up on my channel, that one gets more in depth. I think I spend a good like 12 to 15 minutes really talking about the motivation behind like why am I hosting these videos and what does it mean to the communities at large that struggle with learning in their own way. Is it, today's it's August, so June was the last session we had, and that session we went over uh, making like these safe do-it-yourself experiments that help us hands-on engage with information, the world around us, or what we're trying to learn. And this is something really cool that I made a while ago, actually. And I basically have a bunch of these iron filings in here. And I have some neodymium magnets on the sides of the jar and on the top, on the bottom. And I have a couple neodymium magnets as well inside the jar. And what's really cool is I can move the jar around, right? And you can see the iron filings, like they cling to each other and all that stuff, and they make all these interesting shapes. If you could see those shapes. I have a better camera, but I've been having some technical difficulties with it. But I think it's really cool, like to see how these filings they spike out in different ways, right? And I've gone through like some physical science focused textbooks, and I wanted to come up with a way to make my own like little do-it-yourself experiment that helped me better understand electricity and magnetism. So I figured I'd take some iron filings, and what's really cool is like when I pop off the lid of this jar, and this is a mason jar by the way, but what's really cool here is if I pop this off and I flip it over, you can see those the way the iron filings like stick out in these like spike formations, which is really really cool. And what's actually happening here is they're sort of forming these straight lines, right? You can see they're spiking out in different directions, forming these straight lines in all these different directions. So these straight lines are known as geodesics. But I thought it was a really cool little experiment I put together, and it just kind of helped me engage with with the content I'm learning, and this is like an example of like setting up your own do-it-yourself experiment. I guess something even more simple than that. If I change the position of my camera here, and this is just super simple. These are two marble balls. I showed this the last session as well, just to kind of show what was it? Kinematics or basically like see how the motion motion of objects and like colliding them into each other, right? And this is very simple, right? I just take two marbles. So if you want to make a safe do-it-yourself experiment and you're trying to learn concepts in the physical sciences, and you want to learn how force interactions happen, right? This is just super simple, and this is another example that I showed, and that's just super simple. So before that, I was talking about well, we're gonna talk today. We're gonna talk about not so much. I was gonna talk about compound learning today because in May, and of course at the beginning of the session in June, I talked about active learning and consumption learning, and the difference between active learning and consumption learning is active learning is well, I think consumption learning is a bit easier to illustrate, and then getting to active learning. So let's say I spend a number of hours, weeks, days, what have you, learning how to build a sailboat, and then after all that time of learning how to build a sailboat, I don't build the sailboat, right? So like I consumed all this time to learn how to build a sailboat, and I don't build the sailboat, right? So that's an example of consumption learning. And then active learning is I have like a set of tasks that kind of are in line with each other. Like I do one thing and I do another thing, and it enables me to do other things in like a step by step procedure. Or let's say like I'm looking through papers, or I'm looking at some kind of content that helps me do some work I'm doing at my desk, whether I'm coming up with models for a paper I'm writing. That's like maybe a bit of an ambiguous example of active learning, but you're basically engaging with something that enables you to have intuition and fluidity to apply to something else in the short term or the long term, right? So let's say I actually spend time learning how to build the sailboat, and then in line with that, I start, building the sailboat, and then I use the sailboat, right? I take I I go on a river with the sailboat, right? So I don't waste my time building the sailboat, because the whole point was, oh, I want to build the sailboat, and then I want to go out to the river and go fishing, or what have you, right? Like let's say I was a fisherman and I was motivated to build the sailboat, and then I built the sailboat, right? So it's another example of like flipping that consumption learning example, because wasting time building a sailboat or learning how to build a sailboat, not actually building the sailboat, right? I'm just consuming my effort to not really utilize the time I spent learning how to build a sailboat, and then not actually build the sailboat. And then in this other instance, I built the sailboat, and then there was motivation and goals in line with that, right? Of going on the river with the sailboat, going fishing, right? Because maybe that's like my motivation to get some food, like, or what have you. Um, I was gonna go over compound learning today, but um, I think it's important to talk a little bit about burnout because I think how we manage our time is in line with like how much energy how motivated we are to focus on our day to day, and also uh, how we engage with what we're doing, whether it's work related or we're in school. And
I wanted to say one quick thing about burnout.
yeah,
Um,
sure.
it's a myth that autistic or neurodivergent people have restricted interests. Most people have restricted interests, the majority of people, and it it's more individual than whether or not they're neurodivergent or to what extent they're neurodivergent. And you see that with, I saw that with at Johns Hopkins with pre-meds. There were a lot of, it seemed to repel neurodivergent people. It seemed to be kind of a place where very few neurodivergent people are found, but they just spent their whole life memorizing, it seems, in a high school before they got to Hopkins and at Hopkins and on. And the idea of having a side project to do something differently was unknown to most people. It just was it just was a really narrow interest, pouring everything they got into a particular career from over a decade away. And that just shatters a myth. Like everyone is, there's plenty of neurotypical people with really restrictive interests. It may be a little more accurate to say that neurodivergent people tend to have their own interests, and neurotypical people tend to be interested in what the world around them
May I chime in?
is telling them.
Yeah,
Yes?
yeah, go on.
I feel that there is a difference. I feel that neurotypical people are everyone can have their interests, and of course people get very obviously obsessed with their interests and things like that. But when it's a neurodivergent thing, I don't know. You can look and you can tell when you meet the person. You know what I mean? Like when you just it you get so obsessed with it, you can focus on nothing else. Maybe I won't remember to shower that day or eat that day or feed my cat that day because I am so obsessed about my interests. And after I will go to the library and get all of these books and research the crap out of it, and I'll know everything there is to know about that. But did you remember to go to the bathroom today? Probably not. So I think that is the difference between, a neurodivergent person being obsessed with an interest and a neurotypical person being obsessed with an interest. It's hyper focused. If
So
that
you're
makes any
saying
type of
I'd
sense.
it's
I'd have
high in neurotypicals and extremely high neurodivergent people, is what you're
it.
saying.
It's almost similar to like a compulsion. We're so interested in the thing that we compulsively investigate, and we will, and it's like, whereas like a normal person would, or a neurotypical person would be like, oh, I'm really interested in guitar. I play it like every day. And then like me, like a neurodivergent person would be like, oh yeah, I love guitar. I play it all day.
Exactly. 24 hours.
Like it's the
And
first
then
thing I
maybe
do when I
I'll
wake up, and I don't stop till I go to sleep.
Yeah, those are good points. But I and kind of I guess counter to what Kevin mentioning about the myth. I think that there's this terminology known as cognitive strain. I don't think that's going around too quickly. This is a term that for those of you who are familiar with the Toe podcast, their Theories of Everything podcast, Kurt Jaimungal hosts that. Um, and he interviewed, I think it's about a year ago almost now. He interviewed this philosopher, this Eastern philosopher, Anand Vaidya, is his name, and he brings up this notion that people that especially develop trauma and are exposed to a lot of stressors, that strain, that's very straining on their cognitive load, in the sense that, like, um, it overwhelms people, right? And I know that I experience that. There's moments where I feel overwhelmed, um, by certain situations or circumstances, and that, you could think about that in a different sense, as opposed to like how when you think about physical sciences, and like, let's say, I'm hammering a nail in a door, right? And when the nail goes through the door, it in a way it strains the door, because you're putting a hole in the door that you can't really, the door's not going to be the same. You're going to have a hole in the door because you hammered a nail in there. And if you hammer enough nails in the door, then the door is going to be very porous. If there's a hole in every nook and cranny of the door, right? It's pretty much porous, right? You might as well call it a large wooden sponge at that point, right? If that makes sense. But I think that a lot of people that are experiencing burnout, so to speak, quote unquote, they're straining the stress, the amount of stress that they're dealing with in the moment. They're not balancing, what they're doing, what they're facilitating their attention to, and how they're handling tasks well enough to the point it overwhelms them. So that's why I associate that with cognitive strain, because it's this buildup of stress that doesn't get resolved, and it strains you. Um, but uh, um, but that was the biggest talking point I wanted to get to regarding burnout, is that people they get in this state of being really overwhelmed, and the stress becomes straining. The amount of stress load that they're dealing with that doesn't get resolved, it piles on them, and it feels like you can't handle it, because you're not really doing anything to resolve each of those individual stressors or amalgamation of stressors that are associated with one another. Um, uh, but I guess this gets in more into the dialogue of the discussion at this point. Like, what do you think of that, Kevin? Is that a good counter to your myth point of view?
So, um, so what you're saying is that I was wrong, because it's that just the level of focus is extreme, even with all the neurotypical people studying super duper hard to get into med school. That the neurodivergent people can still generally one up that with their focus interests. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I guess it depends
No,
on.
I'm sorry, boys. Don't fight. Let me jump in again.
Yeah,
I
go
don't
ahead.
I don't want to hear a fight.
Sure.
I think that's kind of a different between maybe like CBT therapy and DBT therapy. There's different therapies for different things. And I hear what you're saying. People get overwhelmed with trauma and all of that, and that is completely valid. I completely understand that. But that's what creates DPD and all its, a lot of issues. But I think that's a separate issue from being neurodivergent when you were born. You know what I mean? Like autism is something you're born with. BPD is created by trauma. It's two separate issues. It's not the same thing,
Mm-hmm.
in my opinion, at least. I'm not educated in, except for my own experience, but I, I just that's how I feel.
Yeah, that's fine. Additionally, what I wanted to say is like even like focusing on basic needs, right? If you don't attend to the right, like if you're not sleeping the right amount of hours, or if you're not eating right, you're not drinking enough water, right? That's you're introducing bodily stressors by not really by being reckless towards basic needs, and then that becomes straining too. So I would also additionally say that the cognitive strain is not just the tasks or the social aspect, the people that you're
I know. I
engaging
totally
with,
get
and
the
so
self care aspect,
yeah.
but when you're in it, when it's you, you don't care.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like it doesn't matter.
Oh
It's
yeah.
that's just how it is. I know it's wrong. That's not how you should live your life, but that's just where we're coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. Welcome. We got another person that just joined us. We were just talking about burnout and how that can impact our capacity to learn and engage with the world around us, and like how does burnout happen? And I argue that burnout is a overload of stressors that strains our capacity to function uh, and engage with the world around us sufficiently, and then we have a moment where we just kind of feel so overwhelmed that we kind of, this crash and burn situation happens where we feel really overwhelmed, and it's really hard to be able to do things that we normally do. And before uh, leading into that, I talked about this jar of. I guess that person just left, or that was the other person that left. I was just talking about this. I have this jar with neodymium magnets on each side and iron filings on the inside of the jar. And what's really cool is you can move the jar around, and there's magnets on the inside of the jar, and this was like something I made to develop a better intuition of electricity and magnetism. And what's really cool is the spikes, the iron filings spike out like straight lines. They somewhat curve a little bit too, not so much, but they curve a little bit. There's a little bit curvature in the pattern of the iron filings, but um, anyway, um, I was talking about that, and I was talking about active learning as opposed to consumption learning. So, but anyway, uh, Ryan raised his hand. Go ahead.
I was gonna say something about burnout. So, my main special interest is math. Besides like Pokemon and there's certain video games I get obsessed about. But with math, I have a lot of moments of understanding where everything just clicks, and that's super nice. But then a lot of the times I just feel like an idiot. Like I'm just reduced to the status of an infant, and it's like all the understanding that I had just is inaccessible to me, and it's really in those moments I say to myself that I'm just going to give up math forever and I'm never going to go back to it, but of course then 5 minutes later I'm right back doing the same thing again. But was wondering if you had moments like that where you just feel like a complete idiot, especially about things that you understand, but they're just not clicking at the moment, and you get kind of burned out.
Yeah. I don't feel like I get in that giving up mentality, but I just kind of like what I do, and this is I should have mentioned this earlier, but we jumped right into the dialogue, which I don't mind. But what I tend to do is I tend to shift focus. And I guess it still makes me productive, but in a different way. Like, let's say, like, I'm going through a math book, and then I just hit a point where, like, I don't understand what I'm reading, or maybe I need a break. Then I don't. Maybe I'll watch a podcast, or I'll do art. What I tend to do is I tend to go to the art, to focusing on the art that I'm doing. So I have an art piece right over here that I have. I also have an art blog, but I think most of you know that art is a way for me to engage with the content that uh, engage with
Very
content and
cool.
information. Yeah, so I'm still working on this, and then there's another one here that I'm still working on here as
I like
well. Thank
music,
you.
and I like to write haikus, but I played the harmonica. My harmonica's broke, so I don't have any right now. I've just been playing an online piano and
Okay,
playing the didgeridoo and stuff.
cool. But what I tend to do is I tend to shift my attention to doing something else. So maybe I'll shift to another. Maybe I'll shift to another book. Like I'll go from math to physics, or or philosophy. Well, I don't technically. I don't tend to read philosophy books. I read one philosophy book because I was sort of peer pressured into reading it, but and I skimmed a couple other ones that didn't quite tickle my fancy. I don't really enjoy reading philosophy, but I tend to speak very philosophically, and my writing is very philosophical and psychological and focused too. So there's sort of some irony in that. But yeah, that for me, like what tends to really work is just shifting focus or shifting perspective shift. You know, that I guess it's kind of like a productivity hack. I'll go from doing one thing to doing something else, because if I'm not constantly, if I'm not doing something, I'll probably end up having like I'll probably have like be a, I'll probably have thoughts popping in and out of my head that make me feel uncomfortable and stuff, like intrusive thoughts and all that stuff. Like, just so I avoid that, like I'll just focus on something else that will capture my attention. But yeah, that's what works for me. But I understand that some people, like, they could just kind of chill and just be like, you know what, I'm just gonna stop doing what I'm doing and just chill. And I don't know if that involves watching a TV show or just doing a hobby or something. But for me, like, I guess for me, I still interpret that as a shift in perspective. But yeah, that's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up. I don't know if you want to build more onto that, or if Kevin had anything to say additionally.
I was just wondering if someone's burning out, have they lost their hyper focus? Because then they're not focusing on, they're not super engaged with any task. They're just kind of floundering.
Well, for me, when I get burned out, I literally can't stop thinking about the things I'm burned out on. So it doesn't matter if I go and play the piano or watch a TV show or whatever, it'll still be sitting in my mind, but it's just unresolved, and I'll just have a desire to resolve it. And that is annoying, and that's why I say I just end up coming back if there's a math paper I'm reading and I don't understand anything in it. I can try and just distract myself, but then I'll come back 5 minutes later and just do a ton of searching and trying to contextualize everything the best I can, and because it will drive me nuts if I feel like this one thing that I'm trying to understand just doesn't work.
Do you
But that's all I have to say.
do you go on like you go through like a lot of Stack Exchange posts, like Math Stack Exchange and whatnot? Like how do you?
Yes,
Okay, so that's your
math
general strategy.
stack exchange, math overflow. A lot of the times they don't answer my question exactly, because a lot of the times when something is confusing me, it's the author's own idiosyncrasies and stuff like that.
Mm,
And sometimes there will be a really good post if it's like a well-known mathematician like Jacob Lurie. A lot of people discuss his work, and but if it's somebody that's less well known, it's kind of hard to find info about it. Um, and I actually have been using AI more recently to have conversations with AI, because AI has a lot of ideas that
mm-hmm.
people don't have, and it helps me grok things, and I can just ask an infinite series of questions. Like it's like a chain of understanding. Like in one explanation, like I was talking to AI about general relativity the other day, and it mentioned something about a time component, and I had no clue what a time component is, so I could just ask, and then if there's something in that explanation, I can just ask and create these chains, and then I can go back to the conversation later on, and it's really cool,
Yeah, for
and it helps build my own ideas
oh
too.
yeah,
Sorry for interrupting.
no, that's all right.
AI used to not be so helpful for this. Like I would be like, "How is X related to Y?" And it would be like, "There is no relationship," or "I don't know of any relationship." But AI's gotten better at making connections between seemingly isolated things, and that's a lot of fun to play around with. Like, yeah,
I've noticed that um, even if Math Exchange or Math Overflow doesn't quite answer my question, it gives me like I'll find certain posts and comments and like a whole comment thread on those posts that give me a lot of intuition that points me in the right direction, but it doesn't quite answer my question, like answer my concerns. But I'm still kind of satisfied. And I'm like, you know what? I didn't quite understand exactly what I want to understand, but I still got something out of it, and that's what I enjoy about Math Stack Exchange and Math Overflows. Like even if sometimes I don't quite grasp what I'm trying to get, like I still get a good chunk out of what I searched for. But I have you do you use GPT 4 or I noticed that 3.5 and 4 are not like I guess it's the context windows a little bit more expanded with GPT 4, like it has a better attention span, but with GPT 3.5, mostly when I ask it the right things and see, like, when I do the chain of thought prompting correctly, it delivers well, but it's still general. It still wants to give me a summary of instead of like explain things, which I find annoying, and that's why I don't like to use AI very much because it's like summarizing a lot and not really
yeah.
getting into the details.
100%. I use Google Gemini, but I have the same problem. Like, I kind of want to talk to it like I'm having a conversation, and it just info dumps an entire book on me, basically. And it will write out like a whole essay about whatever topic I'm asking it about. And I kind of want to take things a little more slow. Um, I also have the same math overflow and stuff like that makes me really happy because I'm always finding new stuff on there, and there's some beautiful comments on there that I find. It's like this infinite game of strings of associations where you could just you can find one search term and then you access like 50 search terms from that, and then every search term there gives you like 50 new things, and it's just like this infinite game, kind of.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I've bookmarked so many math exchange posts just to read later because like I would find so much, and I would look them up on my phone, right, and I would find so much. I'm like, man, I don't have time to read this right now, but I'm gonna bookmark it for later. So I found hundreds of Stack Exchange posts. It's like when I ever feel stumped in math, and it's like, oh, I found these posts. I'm gonna go back to them. So I feel like that's great for like like great for like strategical pedagogy, right? When you go back to something and you refine your understanding of what you learned beforehand, and it just pops back up. It's like, oh, I found these Stack Exchange posts. So I think that's what's great about Stack Exchange, and I think Quora is really helpful too. Like I find some really nice stuff on Quora, and I don't use Reddit very often, but I think Reddit's also very helpful too. Um, for that, I just find some really satisfying posts and comment threads on Reddit or Quora. So yeah, I think that's really helpful.
I wanted to talk a little bit about AI. I
Yeah.
find AI useful as a source of information, but it's really powering it in terms of man hours invested. And the most essential part is the training data, meaning that if I could SQL query the training data, it would be almost, it would, once I get familiar with SQL, it would be just as good as AI, if not more. But I feel that AI lacks a deep understanding of it. They're kind of like, you know, a bit like the spokesperson for a company where they say what the company's doing and they put it all in a positive light, like, oh, we're doing these cool things, but they don't really understand what the company's doing that well. They're more technically, they're more like business and the public face. That's what they're paid to do. They're not paid to understand concepts deeply. And that's where I feel that in terms of understanding something deeply and having a back and forth conversation, it is um, it is there's really no replacement for people, for human beings. AI can help in a conversation to look up facts because it's basically a source of data, source of information. The amount of training data behind it is gigantic, but it doesn't seem to, from my experience, doesn't seem to understand things very deeply, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had a very interesting back and forth on machine learning street talk server. At this point, I keep thinking that they're already pretty famous for people who are really into AI and machine learning. Like I think machine learning street talk is really, if it hasn't blown up yet, it's definitely about that. Like that channel is about to blow up. But I think that one of the things that I brought up that I think is problematic with generative AI in particular is that it's doing this token part. It's part. You give it a prompt, and then it's tokenizing what you gave it, and then it's going through its database. Like it's going through the database, and then there's like a fetch. There's sort of like there's a fetch table associated with the database, right? Of like, and that fetch table is like the most uh, satisfying responses to users who asked a similar who framed a similar prompt based on the patterns of the tokenization, right? So you have this fetch table that is compared to the whole database that the AI is trained that the AI is trained on. And it's not, the problem is it's not doing any deep thinking. Like, the AI is not capable of planning or really gouging like an actual intuitive understanding of the context you're feeding it, right? Because it's just matching, it's matching token associations, right? It's matching like words that mean similar things, words that might that that are phrased differently but mean similar things or the same thing, based on how many users already asked that question to the AI, right? Like, the asking of the question being the prompt. And what chain of thought prompting allows you to do is it allows you to kind of like sift through what it's going to give you. Like, if somebody asked, like, just gave it an initial prompt and that was it, then I feel like you just end up with like a summary. But then you prod at the summary it gave you, and then it's kind of like a nesting, right? But the nest, like, AI is not good at math or physics yet, because it's just doing this token. Uh, it's not really doing any thinking or planning, or it's not doing any reasoning. It's just beyond just, okay, here's a fetch table of the most satisfying responses I've given to users that have asked me a similar that have fed me a similar prompt. And then, like, as like and and it's just gonna it's and it might get to a point where you keep prodding at it and you don't get a satisfying answer, and it keeps and it will kind of like circular logic itself. Because I bumped into this issue a couple of times, like asking AI about math or physics. It's sort of circular logic itself. It will like circle back to an answer it gave you, and it'll try to reword it, right? And then I'm still unsatisfied, because it doesn't have like the reasoning capacities to go through your prompt and like actually pick out the associations and then derive an answer. Rather, it's gonna go through its database after as it's cross-referencing this fetch table, and it's gonna feed you a response relative to that, right? And that's why I'm pretty unsatisfied well, with what generative AI delivers when I engage.
I think I would be happier if I could just SQL query the training data. If they offered, a limited amount for free, kind of like they do with ChatGPT, or paid plan that was reasonable, I could just see, SQL query. It would be a higher learning curve to get in. Like, ChatGPT is a good way for people to talk to it without knowing any SQL whatsoever.
Sure.
No SQL needed. And yeah, that's a barrier for, a lot of people. It's not that hard, but a lot of people are just not, not going to take the trouble to do it. But like, if you're willing to go through that barrier, because I don't know SQL, but it's easy to learn, at least how to do the basic stuff in it. Then, and there's other database engines too, that would work as well. But like, then I think it would be better, because oftentimes it will make a mistake. Something will be wrong in its output, and that's because, well, it's hallucinating. It's trying to fill in. It's trying to interpolate between data points, and it just, doesn't have that. Just doesn't quite work. And the SQL query is really good at a SQL query. I would actually see what the data is, and I wouldn't, and I could fill in the interpolations myself pretty easily.
If I had access to all the Chat GPT SQL data, I would do a sociological analysis of the people that have AI girlfriends, because I think that would be really interesting to see how these people are conversing with AI, what they're getting out of it.
That'd be crazy.
But SQL is very easy to learn. You can learn it in one day. Just it's like 5 commands that you need, really. I mean, there's more complicated stuff.
Yeah.
You can do with it.
Now, keep in mind, SQL is not a programming language. It's kind of a user interface. You could think of it as a user interface that's command line based instead of graphical.
Yeah, I'll definitely say SQL does get a bit more demanding when you have to do the like if you have to do the stuff a database administrator would do, like make you have to make scripts, and then you have to use triggers, and then you have to do all you have to
If you're doing
use
fancy
all
stuff like
this
that,
fancy stuff.
Python, and then make the queries from within Python. Do not write the whole thing in SQL. It's not built for that. It doesn't have the proper programming language features that modern languages have. Meaning, like Python has object oriented, and Haskell has functional, which can substitute for object oriented.
Some code that can do that.
But SQL lacks either crucial way of organizing and writing subroutines and writing the code, because it's not really it's what's called a domain specific language. It's like regular expressions. It's not really built for just flexibility. It's built to do a certain thing really well. And it's good, like if I'm sending SQL queries out to an API key, or I'm writing SQL from my own. I'm writing SQL from like from within Python, like I construct a query from within a Python script. That's when domain-specific languages tend to work well. And that's why regular expressions is so useful. It's generally used from within programming languages. But as a programming language, SQL is not. Python is, C++ is, Haskell is, even assembly is, although assembly is very difficult. SQL's not. No. It's a query format. It's an interface, something I type in queries with, something I call from Python, construct a string and call it from Python, stuff like that. Regardless, it's an impossible thing to test. I'm just guessing. I don't know how useful the training data. There's no way, even if I'm willing to pay for it, there's no way I can test queries of the training data, because they don't sell that. They only sell the AI. And I wonder if they're just kind of trying to hide the real secret sauce, which is the training data.
Yeah, I've heard
It's
people
not the AI as much
request
as it's the training
to
data.
see the training data as well. It's pretty highly. People are pretty interested in the training data, and I will admit I'm pretty interested in the training data as well.
It's an incredible data curation effort. Huge amounts of man hours, often in global south because it's cheaper there. Lots of filtering and quality and fact checking and so on. It's a enormous effort, and I would say it's the vast majority of the man hours is getting the training data. Like that's where the huge effort is. The amount of time programming the AI, although not insignificant completely, is, I'd state, pales into comparison. Because ultimately AI is nothing without data as a source of information. And yeah, and I think people are overestimating AI as this magical thing, as opposed to saying, look, this is a gigantic database. It has many examples of drawing a rectangle with JavaScript. So if you ask it how to draw a rectangle with JavaScript, it will generate code. Well, it's not really generating code. It's pulling from examples, filling in a few parameters, which is probably a fair amount of filling in details with the user's prompt. Probably a fair amount of that is hand coded, to look more impressive, to be more useful. But there's so many examples of drawing rectangles in JavaScript. I don't need, you don't really need AI to generate that. You just can grab an example, fill in a few substitution parameters with the color you specify, and you're good to go. Very useful because you don't have to look something up, but not, you know, not this mysterious intelligent thing that humans have, that many animals have.
Yeah. What I was gonna say relating to AI is I think there is some talk happening regarding energy-based models, or the construction of energy-based modeling architectures. This builds on active inference theory. So active inference has to do with in the moment goal oriented planning and decision making, which is what um, things that are alive can do, because organisms are autonomous systems, and the technologies that we built are not. So they're not. Uh, but I would say that energy based modeling is not necessarily active inference modeling. It's really borrowing from active inference this idea of optimizing in active of of optimizing. Um, I like to call it optimizing, like when an organism optimizes an action or a perception with respect to fitness and within the circumstances it's in. You can think of an energy based model as an architecture that optimizes how it is co- optimizing computation. So it doesn't waste too many resources redundantly. Which is a lot of what these generative AIs are doing. Is there? It's a lot of costs to keep training the model and having more in the database, even though there's a lot of redundancies in the database, right? But I think also an additional problem with handling those redundancies is how can we make sure that the model knows those are redundancies, right? So it's optimizing, okay, it's doing a tokenization now, it's doing this tokenization parsing where it's recognizing and dumping the redundancies for something more minimal, that means the same thing, and is presented more elegantly to as a response to a prompt, right? Um, in terms of tuning how these language models work, with respect to the vast amount of training data that they're using, right? This big database where there's so many redundancies because of all the prompts users will generate, and then it's going to store stuff in the fetch table, and then it's gonna get trained on more data based on what is fed to it. But wouldn't it be nice, right, if the model could recognize what is massively redundant and high, and that contributes to high costs as opposed to what isn't, right? Maybe there's some redundancies there that aren't too high cost, but the whole point of the energy based model is to optimize costs for computing on like being trained on redundancies. So if that makes sense. Um, but I think the big problem with generative AI is the cost, right? And the cost seems to be the insurmountable potential redundancies that the model is trained on. But I'm not sure if that seems like a concern to you, but it does. I do see that as a concern to me. I think it's also interesting that OpenAI announced a number of months ago that they're investing in nuclear energy. So it seems like I don't know if you had any thoughts on nuclear energy and AI.
That's a thorny problem with energy, just total energy, because the more energy it takes, even if they talk about clean nuclear and all this stuff and solar, the more energy it takes, the more fossil fuels are going to end up being burned. Something we can't really afford.
Mm-hmm.
Like cleaning up carbon dioxide from fossil fuels is a monumental pollution cleanup. It's by far the hardest pollutant to remove. Nuclear waste is a trivial problem compared to fossil carbon dioxide. You have a gaseous pollutant, it's very stable, chemically very stable. There's a huge amount of it, evenly distributed all over the world, almost evenly distributed.
I have
Cleaning
to go
that
soon.
up,
My laptop's about to die.
clean that up is almost impossible.
Thanks for joining.
I do have one question before you go. Um, I have trouble finding groups of people, especially older than college age, to like older than 22, to talk about programming projects. It's just a surprisingly hard thing to find. Most like the Python Discord is full of kids and so on. It just doesn't have the maturity of people that are older than that. Do you know of any groups where
Uh,
they have successful in groups?
Not really. I don't really know of any.
this is Callie speaking, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. I'm trying to fucking start one. I invited a couple people. Um, and the Basement Innovation Network that I invited you to, it's got a few more people on it now.
I did see that. Yeah,
Um, the way that I've kind of trying to be promoting it is by like trying to start like because I know there's like all these major hackathons with prizes and shit, but the part of being a programmer is like finding the motivation to do your work, right? And I feel like even without a prize, I feel like the motivation for just doing a hackathon, I mean, for someone like me, is already there. So I mean, if you want,
yeah. We don't need prizes. Prizes. Oh, that's what you were
yeah, we
saying with
don't
the
need prizes.
hackathon.
Yeah, so like just doing like hackathons on Replit, where we just invite people from because what I did was I invited people from any programming Discord I had, and then also posted on Reddit that I was doing a hackathon with the Replit link, and inside of the README file for the hackathon, I put like a link to the Discord and saying it was like the official Discord of the hackathon. Um, so if you wanted to like do something like that, we could probably grow this Basement Innovation Network, and get because there's I'm in a community called Game Dev League. I'll link it actually because it's really great if you want yeah, it's like primarily geared towards game development, but at the same time, a lot
Game
of these
dev's
people are
actually a
programmers.
game dev's actually a great place to test things out because video games are cutting edge in many different directions. They're
Yeah.
cutting edge in and high performance algorithms. They what stresses the performance of a computer? What things do people download? The
So
stresses of
that's
performance
the
is going to
link.
be games almost invariably.
I
So
sent it in the chat.
so if you think Basement Innovation Network has potential, that's wonderful. The main issue I've encountered is age. Oftentimes these online groups are full of kids, and that's not really, ironically, that's not who needs them the most. People who need them most are adults who don't have a college campus to go to anymore. Finished undergrad and either finished grad school or far enough into it that it starts to not really be a campus full of peers. and is and just needs a group of people. Because if you're college, high school, college, you've got campus. You don't need to flood these online communities with immature spam. I'm sorry, but most people that young are immature. I was when I was that young. It's just age. And the issue is not so much the presence of a few of these people. That's not the problem. The problem is when they flood and crowd everyone else out. And that's the issue with the Python Discord. And that's the issue with, a lot of online communities. And if your game dev link has more older people, like even if it also has young people, if it's got more
It's kind of an
foliage
even split, to be honest.
of young and old.
Yeah, it's a pretty vibrant community too. They have like a shit ton of members. Like here I'll go down to the online coders, 6,020. That's just coders.
How do I see the link?
Anyway,
The little text box. I'll send it to you on Discord.
Yeah, I don't know how to open a chat.
I'll send it in a DM. Don't worry about it. There you go. Yeah, 22,507 people online. 97,254 members. Massive community.
I see. I am curious. Since the Basement Innovation Network is starting to have success and starting to grow, since the Basement Innovation Network is starting to grow, since the Basement Innovation Network is starting to grow, I'm just filling out these. Is there a particular direction you want to take it that sets it apart from these other computer coding groups and so on?
Yeah. So I feel like the primary purpose should be like prototyping and education. So, getting people in there that may not know a whole lot about coding, but have like an interest in it, right?
Education itself is pretty well trodden with the Discord Python. It's very great for beginners. It's just not great for me. Not great for advanced coders. So I wonder if education would be best as a separate section, like a sub Discord. So there's a place to go where you could ask technical help. It can be simple questions, it can be very advanced questions.
Yeah,
It can
so
be
I
as
guess then
simple as
prototyping,
why is this while loop blocking? Well, because you're using J instead of I. Or as complex as, why is this cloud EC2 RDS instance not talking to because some configuration's wrong. And then does that make sense?
Yeah, like a tech support kind of thing.
What's really I think that's a useful section to have. I think education's a useful thing to pursue, or at least has an option on a server. So if they get stuck,
I'm gonna make a new text channel called Query the Hive Mind.
So, interesting names. The thing that seems to be lacking from these larger discords, I don't know about game dev, but definitely lacking from Python, which is a very large Discord, is there isn't a good place to talk about your project there.
Yeah, I feel like
You
that
can
should be
mention it
like
in
the
past.
primary purpose. Is like
It's a great way to differentiate ourselves. Like our primary goal, we're going to have an education session because obviously anyone can get stuck with a stupid programming thing, and having having a place to put it will keep the primary from being filled up. So it's a good thing to have. But the primary goal, I think, should be sharing projects. Collaborating, working on stuff for fun. Why can't people just
Yeah,
collaborate on stuff?
almost like Fight Club for programming.
What, Fight Club? Why Fight Club?
Because it's not out in the open. It's kind of like underground, and like it's got like I don't know, like I don't know. I just feel like I don't know. Maybe I just like the movie Fight Club and want to be Tyler Durden. Who knows? But no, I feel like because it's called the Basement Innovation Network, right? And if it's about like discussing our projects and like getting feedback and you know
High level
um,
feedback is, yeah, like not just help me with
yeah,
this technical thing, more like I'm doing this. What do you think of this physics engine idea, and so on.
yeah,
Yeah,
like a think tank.
I get it. Like both are kind of underground.
Yeah.
It's interesting because they're underground for different reasons. Like Fight Club is a secret that they don't want to have
Yeah,
escape.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but you guys have been going on a tangent for a little bit.
Yeah, let's. Sorry about that.
No, it's all right. I do have to get going soon, but I didn't know if there's any more talking points that you want to bring up shortly before
I just want to
ending the
remind
session.
everybody real quick that you know having autism, especially like quote unquote high functioning autism like Asperger's, I feel like is less of a it's really not, they qualify it as this learning disability, but in all reality it's actually a learning superpower. And we were talking about like the myth of special interests or whatever. And one thing that I've come to realize about my own particular flavor of Asperger's is I really I really don't have like, I mean, I do have like my favorite interests, but my interests are not limited to the things I'm interested in. I am interested in everything. I am a information sponge. I'm an encyclopedia of knowledge, and if something is you know worthwhile, then I will invest in it. You know what I mean? I have plenty of time, and I'm interested in everything from spirituality to psychology to marketing, business, game design, programming, anything that takes, a little bit of, intellectual grit, science, and anything that is creative. You know, uh, I'm not that into, drawing, but I used to be. The only problem is I never got that good because of I have difficulty with fine motor skills. But you know what I did is over time I built those fine motor skills by doing different things like adopting new interests like guitar and skateboarding. I used to have this problem where I would
I'm
constantly
wrapping it
roll
up. Shut
my
up.
ankles everywhere I went, and so I picked up skateboarding to strengthen my ankles. I picked up guitar to build fine motor skills in my hands and fingers, and it's great to be really interested in something, but it's even better to I want to say there's it's like a stock term. I want to say diversify your interests. You know what I mean? Wear many hats, and I think that that's something that we're very good at, which gives us a tremendous amount of value. And I think we should all just try to remember that we are extremely valuable, and we are the great innovators of society because we wear many different hats and we have, exceptional amounts of knowledge in specific things.
I think that shows a point that neurodivergent individuals are neurodivergent. They don't think in a similar way. It's different. It's almost like the opposite of a classification. Meaning, if you say, if you classify a group of people, they're going to have some things that they generally have in common. Such as like
Yeah.
Muslims have, they have the Hajj and the Ramadan, and they have these things they can generally relate to. So, but with neurodivergent people, it's like the opposite. It's like you have people that are so opposite. I don't feel like I'm super prone to hyper focusing myself in the way that was described earlier in this conversation. But a lot of people say I'm neurodivergent, and the
Yeah, I know.
I think that's kind of the
I'm almost
kind
done.
of like neurodiversion the other direction. Most people don't have that breadth of interests. You don't have society built on 40-hour work weeks without special interests. It's a lot of effort put into one very narrow thing. Most things. Computer coding is a bit less narrow, but still, still more narrow than I'd like. It'd be nice if my job had hardware design and you know other things in it too, but at least it's broader than most. It doesn't get tedious and repetitive as much as other occupations, because if you repeating something over and over, you can have a computer do it. Um, yeah, so I think that's a good point. Like it's that breadth is really hard for AI. AI cannot bring together distant concepts. They cannot start talking about the no cloning theorem in quantum mechanics and then relate that to birth order effects. So AI is limited because they don't have is something about human brains. It could be quantum mechanics or you know this. I can go on. I can talk more about this later, but I don't want to distract because
I
I
just
don't want to
wanted to
go too
mention
off
one
topic.
thing
I
about
don't want to go
Basement
too off
Innovation
topic.
Network.
Yeah,
I think it would be a good idea and help the community grow if we offered both public and private code team
I'll be
channels.
down in five to
So
eight
like
minutes.
I just put up a text channel called private code team channel requests. So the idea there is people can like, you know, they can say like, "Oh, these are the members of my team. We'd like a private, channel and, to work on our projects." That way we have it will help people by giving them like a home without having to make their own Discord.
yeah. And now, of course, most
Plus,
of the
plus
time,
they can get
I
support for their project within the same Discord that they're using for the voice chat they're in.
yeah, does this sound more useful? So it's a place where you can start talking about your projects. Um,
Yeah.
One thing is, I have one more idea about it, just very quickly. I think we should mention that the basement. Are you over 25?
Me, I'm 31.
Yeah, I think we should mention that the Basement Innovation Network is friendly to people over 25. Now, we're not cutting out people who are under 25.
Yeah, we
We're not
just
going
want
to
to keep
exclude them.
it to like preference heavy preference towards people who have
But
already
there's
kind of gotten
there's a
situated in
large
their life, because
Yeah.
up until 25 your life is very turbulent and you don't really know what you're going to be doing next week.
yeah, the Basement Innovation Network.
All right. Well,
I think we
I thank you guys
yeah.
so much for joining. Not to go on another tangent that could last.
Hey
God
Kevin,
knows
if
how
you want
long.
we can meet up in the general chat over there if you're still available to talk. Sorry Jesse, I
No,
know we kind of bring
no,
up a
it's
bunch
all
of
right. It's all right. Well,
General chat of
thanks so
basement.
much.
Okay.
Thanks so
Yeah,
much for
I
participating. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse, for the invite. I really appreciate that you sent me the message
any
Same
other
saying
quick
here.
things
what was
Jesse
going on.
wanted to say?
Um,
Because yeah, we did go off topic a bit,
no, it's all right. I
unfortunately.
think we covered a lot of detail, and I'll
Okay,
host
so I
another
just
session next month. Thanks so much for participating.
Okay, I just joined General of Basement Invasion.
All
Yeah,
right, see you,
nice
Jesse.
having us.
Take it easy.
Take it easy.
Bye.